Shalom, everybody. I'm Yuval Avivi. Together with Maya Sela, I host the daily literary radio show Undercover in the Israeli radio Kan Tarbut station. I'm very glad you joined us in this series of meetings with Israeli writers here at the National Library of Israel as part of the Hebrew Book Month, which ended a few days ago, but we are still going with the issues that we started. We will have time for questions from the audience. So if you wish to ask something, please write it in the chat box and we will try to address it later. I'm very happy. This is the final meeting of our series of meetings with Israeli writers here at the National Library of Israel. And I'm very happy to conclude this series with one of Israeli writers that has really a special gift, a rare ability to pinpoint the core issues of Israel in his books. And I'm very happy to have him as our guest today. Shalom, Yishai Sarid.
Shalom, hi, Yuval.
Yishai Sarid published the books The Investigation of Captain Erez, Limassol, Nomi's Kindergarten, and I think maybe we will deal today with his last three books, maybe in all of them, but the last three books. The third, which tells the story of modern Kingdom of Judah, in which a third temple is built, and let me tell you, it causes a lot of trouble. The Memory Monster, in which an Israeli guide to the death camps in Poland deals with the way the remembrance took over his mind in some kind of an allegory to what happened to all of us in Israel, to Israel as a national entity. And this book was included in the New York Times list of 100 recommended books of 2020. And his last book, Victorious, where the protagonist is a female therapist that helps the IDF, the Israel Defense Army, to create better soldiers, I would say, to help them be better killers, maybe. We'll talk about this a little bit later. His books were translated to English, French, German, Spanish, Italian, and more. Again, Shalom, Yishai Sarid. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, glad to be here. And if possible, please show yourself. I mean, I would like to see some faces. If it's, yeah, okay.
It's always recommended. It's much more pleasant to see faces than black squares. So if you can, please open your cameras. We will be very happy to see you. Yishai, I just mentioned just a few of the topics that you deal with in your books. And I was wondering, maybe we can start with the way you choose what you're going to write about, because I think sometimes, and maybe it happens later, maybe it happens before, but sometimes it seems like you are some kind of a prophet. You know what's the next issue that's gonna be in the main discussion of Israel, maybe. So how do you choose the topics that you want to write about?
A good and complicated question, because it comes from, I go in my mind with a lot of stories all the time. I mean, different channels going in parallel for years and competing with each other, which one of them will, cross the finish line and be a book. And of course, it starts from something I think about, or something I see, or some pain I have, or remorse, or something that interests me very much. And most of the ideas, nothing happens with them, but some of them advance, and I produce characters and the plot, etc., everything that writers do, and then start writing. Now, why is it? Yeah, sorry.
It always starts with something personal, because,
yes,
as I mentioned, these are national issues. The things that you deal with, you write about people for sure, but the things that happen in your books are national issues. And I'm wondering, how does the personal and the national, how do you combine them?
It always comes from the personal point of view, but in Israel, at least in my life, personal life and public life, or politics, or army, etc., are all combined. Because, for example, almost all of us were soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
And in my age, it's my daughters that are recruited to the army, you know, everything it means to us, with all the worries and everything that comes with it. So it's hard to separate the things. And I can give you specific examples. For example, the issue of Victorious, my latest book so far. I'm intrigued. I served in the army for 6 years. I was an officer, but I wasn't on combat duty, which is, at least it used to be an issue when I was a soldier.
Yeah.
Because in those days, I'm talking 30 or 40, almost 40 years ago, you were supposed, if you were a healthy male reaching 18 years old, you were supposed to be a combat soldier. And I was not, so it's an issue. It's an issue with masculinity. It's an issue for guys, but I was not. Now, you know that from, unfortunately, very unfortunately, every few years we have small wars somewhere, whether in the north or in the south. Lately, it was in the Gaza Strip. And when it happens, I think immensely, you know, about the soldiers who are going there, as if it was me or something very close from my family.
Yeah.
I mean, I cannot sit in Tel Aviv, you know, which is a very nice city and has very nice cafes, etc., and say I'm living somewhere in Europe or in America or somewhere else and I'm not connected to it. I just cannot do it. And I'm very much connected emotionally to those things. So that's one issue. So Victoria started with the thought about a soldier that in the paratroopers was supposed to get into Gaza the next day because there's a small war there. And he's very much frightened. And he runs away to his home. And he tells his parents, listen, hide me. I cannot do it. I'm afraid I might die. And what will they do about it? Will they hide him? Will they not? Probably not. And then for me, that was the root, the little seed that produced Victorious, because I came to the conclusion, because it never happens in Israel. I mean, the parents will give him a nice dinner and drive him back to the border.
Yeah, 99% of them.
Yeah, more than 99%. Not because fearing of punishment, but because they think that's the right thing to do. Even if they, you know, may sacrifice his life or his physical or mental health and future. So it comes from those places. I must say that, you know, from every time after I finish a book and it's about Holocaust and wars and not very happy subjects, I tell to myself my next book will be a nice love story without politics, without army. And then I start thinking to myself, well, you know, it's a legitimate question in Israel. Where did she serve in the army? Did he serve in the army? If yes, where did they serve? To whom they vote in the elections? Do they vote for Netanyahu or for his opponents? So, and that's the end of the beautiful love story. You know, it's
maybe one of them is religious, One of them is
Yeah,
secular,
of course, etc., etc. So
everything.
I cannot actually. There are Israeli writers who are able to do it. I'm not able to disconnect the things that happen here from my writing. I just can't.
So you're unable to disconnect from reality, that's for sure. But also, just from the plots that I mentioned, it's very clear to see that you deal with subjects that are very controversial in Israel. It's not only that you talk about soldiers. It's not only that you talk about religion. You will talk about things that are maybe even taboos, right? The IDF soldiers as better killers, right? The Holocaust remembrance as something that takes over our national and personal identity, that just that's too much for us, right? And maybe the temple, right, which we know that's very polarizing issues. They're not just current events or current issues that we deal with. It's the most polarizing issues in our society.
Yeah, but you're right, but I'm doing it from within. I mean, I'm 100% identifying with my protagonists. For example, in the third, which is the story, I built and destroyed the third temple in Jerusalem. Nowadays, I mean, tomorrow, next month, next year, or something like this. But it's written from the eyes of Jonathan, who is the youngest son of the king Yoaz, which is the king of Judea, which is the kingdom that replaced the state of Israel. It's a religious and militaristic kingdom. The temple is being built, sacrifices offered to God. There, all the priests and the music and everything and the blood, etc., etc. Everything is going on now for quite many years already. But it's not written cynically, and it's not written like, look at those primitive people taking us back 3,000 years ago, 2,500 years back. Not at all. When I wrote the book from this room, usually at night, I was there 100% through the eyes of Jonathan, who believed with all his heart that he really serves both God and his father, the king. And when he was heartbroken in the end, when the temple was destroyed by the enemies, I was heartbroken with him. So it's not, and sometimes it's hard for people who know, and in Israel, people, it's still a small country, and people know your background, your family, your political affiliations, etc., etc. So sometimes people are being confused, because when I tell the wonders of the temple and the wonders of it and the psychological benefits of sacrificing animals to God, so some people who know me say, wait a minute, what are you doing here? I mean, you're supposed to oppose it. And when I tell about Abigail in Victorious, who is training psychologically young soldiers how to kill in fight, I got quite a lot of criticism. How come that me, leftists, etc., describe it in such a close and maybe empathic manner? I mean, so that's literature, So it's the subjects are controversial because I go to the extreme. I feel myself easiest, most comfortable as a writer when I go to the extreme positions of people who are in extreme professions, who are on the borders, who face the danger or the challenges. And then I feel comfortable to play around there. But when I'm there, I'm 100% with them.
It's amazing that you tell us now that you got criticism from the left side for building the temple in your book, or for writing with empathy about the psychologist working for the IDF, because I would imagine that your books will receive such criticism from the right wing, because for me, when I read your books, it's not about knowing you, it's about how I read the books. It feels like you have a lot of criticism about it. When you write about the Third Temple, you write about religious extremists that burn down this country. When you write about the Holocaust remembrance, you write about us unable to leave our past and live as a normal nation with an identity that's not connected or rooted in this terrible destruction in its past. And when you write about the IDF, you obviously write about the foolishness of sacrificing these young lives in war, regardless of how necessary it is with our security situation in Israel. But it's always very clear to me that it's not, you may be writing from within and you write with empathy to your characters, but you're very critical about the issues that these plots reflect in Israeli society. For me,
of course, but Yuval, I tell you reality, and it's very complicated. I'm not sure we have but let me say it like this. For example, the third is a Jewish tragedy, and they wrote it in an intention to write a Jewish text. It's all full of Jewish holy scriptures, paragraphs from there. There's not one foreign word in this book. It's only Hebrew. All the myths and all the collective subconscious of it is derived from Jewish heritage. Now, that's not the most natural thing for a secular left-wing writer in Israel to do nowadays, because we are in some way now that we gave away our tradition, our cultural heritage to the religious people who nowadays, most of them are right-wingers also. And we are going to American culture and, I don't know, Indian culture, whatever you want, European culture, going to Berlin. We don't want anything to do with that. And I'm not there, I'm not there. That's also my playground. Jewish scriptures, Jewish, of course, the Bible, etc., are also my heritage. And I feel that I'm eligible and free to play with them as Jewish. By the way, Jewish scholars did all over the centuries.
Yeah.
Many generations. So that's kind of unusual. Now, if you're talking, for example, about the book Victorious, which it's an military tale, military story, I think some people were angry that I was not from the United Nations. I mean, when I describe through my protagonist's eyes, now she's a very problematic protagonist. She's not a usual lady. Her expertise is, like I described before, of killing other people, etc., etc. But when I describe her, and she's not an extremist, she's not some fanatic or something, but she wants our guys to kill the enemy and not the other way around. Now, for some people, it was hard to swallow. How come you are not, sitting on the fence? No, I'm not sitting on the fence. Of course, war is terrible. But they criticized me for not putting a headline or, putting some words in top of every page. War is terrible and we shouldn't go to war. I mean, Of course, that's what the whole book is about. But while writing it through her eyes, I'm not from the UN.
Yeah.
I'm not from security codes. So I want also our guys to kill the enemies and not the other side. I'm not from outer space.
So let me ask you, we're talking about the IDF and the remembrance of the Holocaust, which are things that are very current, very, very real in our lives. However, the temple more ancient past of us. However, I'm not sure what happened first. Did you start writing the book, or the movement to rebuild the temple gain power in Israel? I'm not sure what was first. I think maybe it came together. But the fact is that in the last couple of years, there are more and more people who are very, very keen to rebuild the temple, very serious about it, have plans, trying to get money, trying to get the right people in the government to support them. And they're very, very serious about rebuilding the temple in its original place, which of course will mean a horrible, horrible war in the whole of the Middle East, which is what happens in your book. And sorry. And I wonder, how did you encounter these people, the people that are very that swore to rebuild the temple, and how did they react to the way you portray it?
Yeah, first of all, you are right that more and more Jewish people in Israel are interested and are active in the plan to rebuild the temple, which of course will be a disaster for the plain reason that, simple reason, that the mask, the golden dome mask you all know from pictures, stands on the same place, which is one of the most sacred places for Muslim people in the world. After Mecca and Medina, it's the third sacred place for them. And we see also that every few months now there is a conflict over the prayer there and who controls this area, etc., etc. And if you go to the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem, there is the Temple Institute, in which everything is ready. You see that the menorah, all the artifacts, the clothes of the priests, all the tools for sacrifice, everything is ready for the great day.
And they have a course for priests too.
Yeah.
They teach people how to be priests at the temple.
Yes, so there is a very serious and a clear intention of those national religious groups to do it. And let's remember that during the 1980s, there was a Jewish terrorist group that fortunately was stopped, but they planned to explode the mosques on the mountain in order to build the temple. It used to be those used to be marginal groups, dangerous but marginal groups. In recent years, you see it coming to the center. And I felt it. The third was published in 2015, and I already felt it in the air. Because what happened in Israel, that, we're going a little bit to history, but in sociology maybe, but Israel was mainly created by secular Zionist groups that were not very much interested with the temple and generally with religious things. And they didn't pay very much attention to this place. But we know that those groups lost their hegemony, lost their superiority in Israel society. And after the 6 Days War, after 1967, the settlers, the religious right, nationalistic, became more and more prominent, although a minority in Israel society, but an avant-garde, very much influential, both in politics and both ideologically. And they say to people like me, listen, it's very nice that, you know, we have a country now which is economically a big success, you know, startups and high tech, etc., etc. We have a strong army. We're not helpless anymore, and we have our problems. But Israel, you know, it's some aspects of them are really close to a miracle, because within 72 or 74 years, we achieved a lot. But they say, those people, that's not enough. We didn't return to Israel, we didn't return to Zion in order to be just like any other regular country in the world. We have a religious duty, and our religious duty and faith obeys us to rebuild the temple, because many commandments, many commands of the Jewish religion are dependent on the existence of the temple: sacrifice, going to Jerusalem 3 times a year for festivities over there, etc., etc., all the things of the priests. And actually what they say that is, we've been in the diaspora for 2,000 years. And there, Judaism became kind of an intellectual culture, intellectual religion, and replaced the issue of the issue of sacrifice and priests, etc., etc. A real God, not some sorry, some kind of intellectual God somewhere in the sky, which you look for in the books. No, we'll have a real God within the temple, and the high priest will go there every Yom Kippur once a year and enter to God and splash the blood of the animals on the curtain there, etc., etc., and everything will be great. Now, the crazy thing that happened, and maybe the funny, I don't know if it's funny or it's scary, many of those people read my book, The Third, which, by the way, wasn't translated to many languages. I think less languages than all other of my books. And they said, listen, we read your book. You are very precise about the details of how the temple will work. But listen, there will be a temple, as you described in the book, but it won't be destroyed, and everything will be great and beautiful, and all people will come there, and it will be really great, you know. So there became some kind of dialogue. One day I got a phone call from an architect from Jerusalem, a real one with a nice, you know, serious office, and he told me, listen, I planned very specifically the area of the temple and of where the palace of the king will be. You know, for building, like the architects do.
He has plans ready in his office.
Ready, which there are available ready plans already. And I read your book, and I found there a lot of very nice design ideas for the temple, which I would like to use, if you permit me. So, you know, so it almost becomes reality. Now, in serious terms, we already see it in Israel, and there's a very big. It's not a cultural war, almost a cultural war or a conflict between the people who want to bring us back to those days and bring Judaism to those days in which it was based on sacrifice and rituals, etc., etc., and between others who want to keep Judaism and Israel as a humanistic place based on other and different ideas and bases. So it's a big deal here.
We're being asked, is the third temple, was it translated to English yet?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
How come? Too controversial maybe, or maybe?
No, I don't think so. No, that's not the issue. It's what I was told. It will be very hard for a foreign audience, non-Israeli audience, because it's of its language and its reference to Jewish religion, and so there will not be very much common ground. And I can tell you, one of the few places it was published was in France, and it wasn't successful there. And I asked my publisher there, and he told me, listen, people treat it as a religious book.
Right. Well,
and ironically, I mean, so
it's very ironic because it's a dystopian book, which I think you don't have to be Jewish to relate, because maybe now after the last 2.5 years we had, maybe you can try again, because everybody loves dystopian books now. So
maybe
another kind of dystopia.
Yes.
Let's maybe read a little bit of one of the translation to English. The Memory Monster, right? You're reading from the Memory Monster, right?
Yes. So as you told before, the Memory Monster is, if I may say a few words before I read it.
Of course.
I wanted, my family name is Sarid. Sarid is a remnant in English. The original family name was Schneider. My family came, most of it, from very small villages somewhere in eastern Poland, which is now Ukraine, western Ukraine, poor places. And my ancestors came, most of them came here during the 1930s, but many of my family stayed there in Eastern Europe and was murdered in the Holocaust, in the Shoah. And in 1945, my grandfather changed the name from Schneider to Sarid, to remnant, because he was left on almost the only remnant from his entire family. And for many years, I read a lot about Holocaust, everything I could put my hands on, like history books, of course, and survivors' memoirs and documentary films, etc., etc. But I couldn't find the right angle to write about, because it's, of course, maybe the most sensitive issue to write. And I knew I don't want to write a fictional Holocaust story. I don't like those fictional Holocaust stories too much. So, that's a cat. Yeah. I'm not going to sacrifice it, so don't worry.
Thank God.
Yeah. So then, and I've been to Poland twice. The first time was when I was 18. It was one of the first delegations to Poland. And the other one was when I was 50, when I already knew more or less what I want to write about. And then it was a completely different story. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later. And when I came back from the second journey, I began to write this book, which is the story of a young Israeli historian whose expertise is in the history of the Shoah. And he also guides those groups going to those journeys, Holocaust journeys to Poland. And I'll read you a short passage. Most of his groups are youth groups from high school students, which is almost some kind of passage rite for Israeli youngsters, but this time he guides a military group of the Israeli army. And he starts by, in the beginning, he's very successful in this job. And he he goes by the script, usual script that is written by or dictated by Yad Vashem, which is the National Institute for the Remembrance of the Holocaust. But as time goes, he starts asking himself and his groups harder questions, and this is part of it. If you had been serving in the German military at the time, say in the Armored Corps, or in an airplane maintenance, or in personal management, or in the electronic intelligence bunker, and your beloved homeland was at war with its enemies on all borders, would you have defected if you'd find out that somewhere far off in the east, people were doing this kind of dirty work? I guess not. I know I wouldn't. Once in Birkenau, on an especially hot summer day, after I'd already guided many military delegations, after too much sun and not enough water, I started seeing flashes. I stood in front of the soldiers among the concrete ruins of the Death Wing, and the questions in the back of my mind punched their way out. Who among you would have defected? I blurted. No hands were raised. The expressions were embarrassed. The pretty junior officers looked at each other like, what does this guy want from us? I asked them another questions. If you knew that one morning you were going to wake up to find out that your eternal, most hated enemies had been wiped out off the face of the earth without any blood on your hands and without having to see a single corpse, how many of you would feel sad about it? No hands were raised. The commander of the delegation, a colonel, walked over and whispered in my ear, they don't understand your question, you are confusing them. What you are doing is inappropriate. The entire camp was spinning, the treetops, the small buildings, the concrete. What am I doing? What am I doing? I didn't mean to lead them to this alley of nightmares. I was sentenced to be here alone.
I think it's a great part of the book because it talks about what you're allowed to remember, how you're allowed to approach the remembrance, because I think we all agree, obviously, that as Jewish people, and I think globally, not only if you're Jewish, you have to remember it, right? But also you have to think about, and your book demands that we think about how we remember and what does the remembrance do to us, because it's not allowed, right? You're not allowed to put yourself in their shoes because it's absurd. We would never do that, right? It's the limits of what's allowed to do with the memory, right?
When I was 18 years old, I was in this journey, and they took us to the Auschwitz site and to other places. And I remember I was a good history student. I understood everything in my mind that they showed us. But somehow I remembered that nothing entered my heart. It was as if I was defending myself, because it's really, really hard to be in those most terrible places on earth. You know, it's and being 18 and going there, it's a tough mission. And when I came back, I was asked, what was your lesson from this journey? And I answered the same answer that 99% of the youngsters, high school students who go there come back with, is we have to be very strong that it never happens to us again, which is, by the way, a very good lesson for Jewish people after the Holocaust. And then I was in the army, and they served 6 years, not just the mandatory 3 years, and was officers. And, you know, part of it was because of this lesson. But when I was 50, and I went there again, having children and family and being wiser, what can you do? You're wiser usually when you are 50 than you were 18. So those questions started, you know, popping up in my mind. And we are used, and there's a good excuse for it, to think about the Holocaust as its victims. And we were the victims. But now we are, some of us may say, thanks God, I'm not religious, so if you want, thanks God, we're strong, we can defend ourselves. We suffer a lot of traumas that never healed from the Holocaust, but objectively, we are strong. So we must start asking ourselves hard questions that we didn't do before, because we have we are not the helpless victims anymore. And those are really real questions, you know, because we have our fascists, and we have our racists, and we have our people who want to solve problems by war and murder. So we shouldn't compare everything, you know, and Holocaust is not comparable to nothing, but we shouldn't wait until there is another Holocaust somewhere in the world in order to interfere, you know. We should be clever than this.
In reference to the things that you say, maybe people in the audience don't know, but you said you're a writer by night, but by day you are a lawyer. You practice law, and I wonder how. I'm not sure that lawyers are more moral than other people.
No, they're less moral.
Maybe less. You're allowed to say that. I'm not.
Okay.
But you deal with the specifics of what's allowed and what's not allowed, and how can you do something that's not allowed? How can you find this loophole that you can do this? So in reference to the things you just said about asking the right questions and being mature and and realizing your own strength, how does being a lawyer, which is the main thing that you do, affects your writing and your being a writer?
It's complicated, a little bit schizophrenic, you know, so to say, life. In recent years, by the way, the balance is more on literature, becomes more and more literature, but I'm still an active lawyer and I practice law. What can I tell? First of all, in Israel, you cannot, it's very rare to live by your writing. You know, almost all writers do other jobs, and they, you know, being a lawyer is something that I do from an early age. And sometimes I even enjoy it. And I don't think that if I had all time just for writing, I will write better books. I mean, most of the time I don't write. Most of the time I think about the next books. You have to be very careful, because legal writing may corrupt your literary writing. And once I had an experience, you know, I rent a nice office in Tel Aviv. And once, quite a lot of years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago, I told myself, listen, you have this nice office, why not in days you finish your legal work relatively early, let's say 4 or 5 p.m., start writing over there. You have quiet there, you know, and everything is nice. And I wrote a complete novel there, a complete book, 200, 250 pages. And then when I reread them, it was like a complete boring legal text. and I abandoned it, and it's somewhere here in my,
But maybe you can find.
And so then I understood that I have to separate really physically. I mean, I need to go home and have dinner and talk with my kids when they still agree to talk with me, and etc., and see some sports in television, and just afterwards go to this separate world of writing literature, which is really a separate world emotionally and intellectually.
But maybe you can find inspiration in the legal work.
I don't write about specific stories I hear at work, because usually they're not, they have to be, it's not exactly what's easy for me or comfortable for me. But what you learn as a lawyer, especially as a lawyer who deals with litigation in court, is to tell a story. Mm-hmm. Because that's what trial lawyers do. They tell stories. And I remember I once worked for the government. I was a prosecutor in the Ministry of Justice, and I prepared this, how do you call it? The Ktav Ishum, the text in which you blame the defendant for his crimes, and you describe all his actions. Indictment. I wrote his indictment, and his lawyer came to me and told me, this is off the record, of course you will not quote me, and he told me my client read your what the indictment you wrote, and he told me it's exceptionally good, it's exactly like it happened. So it was one of the great compliments I got for my literary abilities. Yeah.
Let me ask you another biographical question. Your father, Yossi Sarid, was a prominent politician in Israel. He was known as one of the education ministers of Israel. Your grandfather, Yaakov Sarid, was the head of the Ministry of Education also. He wasn't the minister, but he ran the office. And I'm wondering how did your upbringing in a political family, in an education-oriented family, shaped you as a writer?
It shaped me, first of all, as we're all shaped by our families and our parents and grandparents. It was a very much dedicated, those who were very much dedicated people for the public. My late father, he really woke up every morning to change the world. He usually didn't succeed, but that was his intention, to make peace, social justice. So there was a fire in his heart. And also very tough person, because otherwise you cannot succeed in politics, and very moral one. I mean, in very early stage, he understood that you cannot be prime minister in Israel if you stand by your morals and your principles, and prefer the principles on the political career. I mean, he was a minister, the prominent politician, but he knew he will not be a prime minister because of it, because he not tried to flatter the voters and not find some, centrist, unexisting position, etc., etc. It didn't give me a lot of appetite to enter myself into politics. And I think we have examples in Israel of writers, very good writers, like Moshe Shamir, like Samach Izar. Maybe others went into politics and lost their literary abilities. If you want to be a serious politician or a serious writer, you cannot do the both. You cannot do it both, because it demands your entire attention and time, being a politician. And they had a lot of faith in the Israeli enterprise. They were Zionists. They were not post-Zionists, of course, they were not anti-Zionists. They thought that Zionism is a moral and just movement intended to give the Jewish people a national home in the country like any other nation in the world. But at least my father, my late father, was heartbroken in his last years seeing what's happening here, because he see us losing our morals. And he thought the occupation of the territories is a disaster for Israel. But he always laughed at me or criticized me that I'm kind of the centrist or the rightist in the family. And that's why I write books, you know, because in books you can express yourself in a more complicated and sometimes contradicting way than in writing an op-ed for Arts newspaper or any other newspaper.
We have to finish our talk in a short while, but I have to ask you about being translated, about the experience of reaching other audiences, and obviously your books are very Israeli. It's very Israeli, and maybe some of them are very Jewish. So you can relate to it if you're Israeli, but I wonder, how did the people, the new audiences that you met when your books were translated, how did they react to things that, like you said, you know, the temple, it's like a inside issue of very tiny people, right? Jewish people, they're not so many of us, especially not in Israel. And the IDF, it's something that we can all relate to, we can all understand, because we all served as soldiers. But I wonder, how do people around the world react to the books? How is your experience when you find out how they read your book?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that I have a widening audience of readers in many parts of the world. And the issues connect to people also outside Israel. For example, the issue of remembrance, of memory, of traumas, of historical, it relates to many, many places. For example, I've been in Catalonia with the memory monster. And they related it to the issue of the memory, remembrance of the civil war there, with all its horrors of the Franco regime, and the issue of Catalonia, and the issue of the civil war with the socialists, and with everything that happened there, and the way they deal with the memory. So they're really connected to it, both historically and emotionally, to this issue. The issue of the army, you know, those are issues of life and death, and life and death are the most basic materials of literature and of art. So people relate to it. It's, of course, I like very much to be translated and published abroad, because it's much bigger audience you can write to, and you get reactions and critiques, and you have dialogues with people who have different points of view than of Israelis, and that's very refreshing sometimes, and you know, causes you to think about things differently.
The story about Spain is amazing, about being able to connect to this book throughout their own national and obviously personal trauma. It must have been very emotional to hear this. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, the issue of the Holocaust is very much existing, you know, all over Europe at least. And how to deal with the remembrance, because people told me in Germany and in France and in other places I've been with this book, with the Memory Monster, that the Second World War and the Shoah is becoming more and more among young generations something of ancient past.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they know about it, they learn about it in school, but it's nothing that relates to their lives. And like frozen in some museum behind the glass cover. And they tell me, educators, historians, readers, etc., that that's part of the reason why racism is rising again, anti-Semitism is rising again, fascism, etc., because the lessons of the war, end of the Shoah are lost. And that we must find new ways to connect them and to relate them to younger generations. And of course, art and literature is some way to do it.
Yishai Sarid, I want to thank you so much for
Thank
this
you,
talk.
Yuval.
It was really inspiring, and you know, as a son for a family of educators, maybe that's the education person in you, maybe being able to tell stories that will educate the younger generation about these topics. Thank you again for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody who joined us. Really appreciate you being here. It was very nice that you opened your cameras and to see your faces. It was wonderful. Thank you for everybody that participated in this series of 4 meetings with Israeli writers here at the National Library of Israel. Thank you again, Yishai Sarid. Thank you again for participating.
Thank you all. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
להתראות.
Bye-bye.